Chapter 601. After spending a day with the king and finding out Eliana was pregnant, I returned home peacefully. The next few days went by just as calmly. I even gave the girls a day off, although I personally couldn't remember the day that well. Tara continued to work on the wall. She had also shown me a new item she had created. It was rather ingenious. It was a golem creator. She had apparently gotten the idea when I talked to her about automation in my own world. She had worked with the resident enchanter toward building such an item. In short, it could construct golems and program them to carry out simple tasks. We had built a handful of prototypes, and they were now being used to clear the forest outside of Cham and even till some land to eventually be used as farmland. Mana was a part of everything in this world, and years of having a dungeon suck the land dry had made it all but infertile. However, I knew about certain bean plants being good for revitalizing land, and I knew that with the fairy spring, the land would rapidly recover. Already, the green around the city that had once been brown and dead was green and lively. My own dungeon, apparently, also sucks out mana from the land, but it mostly sucks from the mana spring. Furthermore, because the spring wasn't just a source of mana for the dungeon, but a supply of waters of life for us to sell, the waters of life would diminish and eventually be destroyed. This didn't happen because I was thankfully able to renew the waters of life by using fairy dust and my own mana. Astria then could concentrate the spring water. Doing that once a week was enough, but when I did it daily, the spring grew stronger and more magical, and the benefits derived from it also increased. As for her golem creator, we needed to contact people from Jesbane if we wanted to advance it farther. With time, Tara said that she could build all kinds of different golems. Golems that maintained stuff. Golems that built stuff. Golems that could defend the city. However, I saw it as something else. In my mind, the golem creator was basically a magical 3D printer. The thing that made it the most impressive wouldn't be in producing golems, but in producing magical items. That's right, I imagine a world where we could print storage rings, enchantment-enhanced jewelry, and even armor. We could begin to mass-produce such useful items. However, a trip to Jesbane would be almost mandatory, and right now, I was still trying to help stabilize Oberys. Prince Oberys was going to become the new king soon, and with a turncoat to the north, bandits to the south, and a hostile wilderness everywhere else, Cham wasn't so stable that I was ready to make that journey. I didn't necessarily need to make the journey myself. If I was able to mark someone on my map and follow them, I could technically make a portal directly to them, and then once I was in Jesbane, there wouldn't be an issue. Unfortunately, it was proving impossible. It took about a month to reach the capital city from Old Cham. Reaching Jesbane would take anywhere from 6 months to a year. Dioshan had its borders closed off to the east. That meant you had to either go up through Imperial Cloud Meadow and Sheikah, or go down to Esmar and try to take a boat. Dioshan sank boats sailing in their waters, so you wouldn't just have to make a year-long voyage, but have to avoid being shot down. As for Sheikah, there was a large river between Imperial Cloud Meadow and Sheikah. From what I heard, no one who crossed it ever returned. This included the master blacksmith who once worked with Ruby. As a result, Sheikah was an extremely mysterious place. As for Figaro, I didn't know how he had managed to penetrate their ranks. I knew that he was a special case though. Tara's parents had supposedly come from Sheikah, but they were both famous magicians who lived a simple life. Furthermore, Fena had mistaken Xiao as a woman from Sheikah, although I later learned she had actually come from a northern city on the border of the Demon Lands. She was Japanese, so that seemed to suggest that Sheikah contained people who appeared Asian. That only served to make it more mysterious. Suffice it to say, it would be some time before I could finally visit that place. Chapter 602. Deke. What are you doing in here? Haven't you already gotten the orders? I asked. The guildmaster chuckled. Ah. It's about that then. I thought you'd take some more time to rest. You seem to always be going somewhere. It's tiring just watching you. The girls don't seem to want to take any days off. I guess that one day was enough. Even Carmine sounded energized on my last contact with her. When I had suggested a day off, I had forgotten about Carmine and Salicia, but I heard the girls had brought them to Cham for the day. It seemed to have done them well. Either way, Carmine's next fight is going to be coming up soon, so I was thinking about training her up a bit. Wouldn't that mean dungeons? Diarage is a bit too big, and we don't know where any of the other dungeons in the wilderness are. That's why I'm sending Lydia, Tara, and Celeste out to do recon. They're going to try to locate the dungeons in the wilderness, but that might take a couple of weeks. Weeks? Is it wise to send out your strongest? The guildmaster asked worriedly. After all, we did just have a giant golem attack the city. Wait, what? Ah. Nothing. I mean, what if a giant golem attacked the city? I'm just worried your party will be too weak to handle any of these missions. Even if we can resurrect you, it's something I'd like to avoid. I didn't take offense. The guildmaster had sent countless people out on missions, so he was really just trying to make sure I had thought of everything. I had carefully considered things. It was getting to a point where I couldn't afford to move around as a group any longer. The girls needed to depend on each other to overcome challenges by themselves once in a while. As for why I picked the three, Lydia was the best scout, hands down, so it made sense for her to go. As for Celeste, her ability to fly allowed her to get a vantage point and see things at a distance. Finally, Tara could build protective barriers, buying them time, and also create shelters so they could rest safely if needed. Besides, if they got in trouble, they had access to portal and could flee if needed. There was also another reason I decided to do things this way. The girls had sat me down and given me a scolding the other day. They said that I wasn't giving enough time toward Raisa, Carmine, and Salicia. I had worried they knew Raisa was pregnant, but they didn't seem to indicate as such. I suspected that Astria and Elia knew, but thankfully, they had kept this knowledge to themselves. Thus, I was going to bring Raisa, Carmine, Salicia, Xiao, and Mickey with me on this adventure. I worried a little about Raisa, but I wasn't taking her into a dungeon. Rather, the quest was to hunt bandits in the countryside. Carmine was a protective wall, Xiao a skilled assassin, and Mickey was good at detecting life force. No one knew more about bandits than Salicia. Supposedly, Carmine and Salicia were more powerful than the other girls too. Since I could take over the scouting duty, there was no reason Raisa even needed to risk her life at all. Unfortunately, you're registered as a team for E. It has to be those 5 girls. However, you can use your individual registration, you can accept requests as well. Unfortunately, that puts you at F. Okay, that's what the prince is trying to fix. I sighed. Are there any F-level bandit requests? No. I didn't think so. Are you sure we can't make an exception? The adventuring guild isn't run by the nobility. I have to follow the rules here. I would love to make an exception, but I can't. The lowest bandit level quest is AD, so even if you did sign up for a new E-party, it'd be a problem. Then, what do you have in mind? I figured there was no way he'd tell me this unless he had a plan. That's simple. You're going to have to accept the mission with a guide. Fortunately, I found the perfect person for you. Ah? Who? Chapter 603. I didn't have to wait to find out who the guildmaster selected, as she nearly jumped up. She was a tall, muscular woman, and one I hadn't seen in some time. Big sis. She puffed out her cheeks. You still won't call me by my name. It's Ruby. Are you bi? There was a time when she had seemed so large and powerful to me. She honestly had intimidated me a lot, and so even though she was always nice, I kept a distance from her. However, that was the old Deke. I wasn't only more muscular than I used to be, but I actually grew a little too. I heard it was an effect from leveling rapidly. Your body started to change to match your skills and abilities. After dealing with the Austrians, Ruby didn't seem so imposing anymore. Rather, after being around so many strong women, Ruby appeared a bit cute. She was still a big woman, although she wasn't so large as to be Austrian, she was a bit over 6 feet tall. She had a big chest that made Celeste's look small, and was even bigger than the Queen's. She also tended to wear very little armor, exposing a lot more skin. I wasn't sure how that tied into her being a skilled adventurer though. Ah, so you'll be joining me? She grinned a big smile. I've been waiting for a time I could take you out. To think you've been an adventurer for around 4 months, and you still are a grade F. That's really slow. Ruby. The guildmaster rolled his eyes. You know the situation with them wasn't exactly ideal. He knows I'm just teasing him. She hit my shoulder hard, but where I remember it hurting once, it only felt like friendliness now. Anyway, the mission is bandits. I have to tell you, bandits are tough. Monsters are only so smart, but bandits are as smart as you and I. Also, although these quests are leveled, bandits are unpredictable. It's very easy for a C quest to jump to A because we had their numbers wrong or a particularly strong person joined their group. Death is common against bandits. That's why so few adventurers have been doing anything about them. That, and they're as tough to handle as cockroaches. They can be resurrected by dark priests, and they'll hold grudges. If you capture them, you need to deliver them to a city with the strength to hold them, or the bandits will raid the city and they end up free again. Yeah, I learned that the hard way. I said bitterly. I was hoping to get a quick buck and ended up handing in a bandit leader that had attacked us close to the city of Pembroke. However, that city was attacked and the man I had just defeated had been freed only a short time later. He later died, but there was nothing keeping him from being resurrected. At the moment, I had no clue if he was still out there, plotting against me. I'm just being frank with you here. It's a very tough job. I'm not a dungeon diver, and I know you have the threat of permadeath hovering over you, but battling bandits is a completely different beast. As much as we like to act like we're immortal, we only have so many lives before death psychosis begins. That's when your spirit has been worn down by so many deaths you start to suffer unseen trauma. So, battling bandits that have just as many lives and can be just as skilled and powerful as we are can feel like trying to hold back a flood with just your hands. I've known dungeon divers, who are used to the clear rules and expectations dungeons provide, crack under the pressure of bandit hunting. It's not for everyone. Ruby. Haven't you scared him enough? The guildmaster admonished. I merely let out a chuckle. Actually, I think we'll be fine. Ruby gave me a worried look. She clearly wasn't convinced. It looked like I was just going to have to show her what we could do. Chapter 604. I love you all, good luck. I had just finished explaining my plans to Lydia and her party and was now setting them on their way. I said my farewell to Lydia, Celeste, and Tara, including a long night with Pervert equipped. It had gone up another level, and so had Harem Master. I didn't know what I did to get Harem Master to increase, but it seemed to have been leveling normally. I equipped it just for kicks. I was now at level 3, and it had given me 3 skills. The first skill was another status bonus that seemed to only affect girls in my harem and also in my party. The second level gave me harem boost. I didn't know what it did, but I presumed it was a status boost as well. It didn't appear to be an active skill, whatever it was. The third ability was called Harmony, and I could guess what that meant. It helped the girls get along a bit easier. It had to be working, because Astria and Elias seemed to be getting along better with the others recently. They even agreed to help protect the city while we were gone. Well, if it was anything major, I could use return and be home in a second, so I made sure that the mayor knew not to depend on them too much. I had a bit more trust for Astria than I did Elia. She was still a wild card. I hadn't made her my slave. She was just a tamed monster. However, a tamed monster was just that, someone who was tamed. Dogs were tamed, but that didn't mean they didn't bite their masters. Monsters couldn't be controlled fully, where slaves could, at least in this world. Slavery was a removal of freedom, where taming was a form of reliance. As for Mickey, Raisa, Carmine, and Salicia, we would be gone from Cham for a while. We'd be out in East Oberus, hunting bandits and forging alliances. Then, when Carmine needed to do her gladiatorial fights, we'd get involved in those as well. With Portal, it was rather easy to move around, so just like how I slowly descended in the dungeons while sleeping at the mansion every night, things wouldn't be much different here. We'd progress along the countryside and then return to Aelrith every night. Why was I staying in Aelrith? I wanted to give Cham some time to grow without me. I didn't want the city to be too reliant. I had a feeling that I would be outgrowing Cham in time. After sending that miner's town to the grave, I realized the importance of having more support. I needed other cities. That's why my girls were trying to survey the wilderness. If we could reclaim it and build another city, that would be best. With Terra's increasing skills, a second city, maybe a few forts, would all be possible. I even had such fanciful dreams as taming a dungeon. It wasn't a monster, but it might be possible to control it like one of the great dungeons. Then I could have a city like Diarage that attracts people. Furthermore, I could always pilfer mana for my own dungeon, if needed. I had many plans, but they needed to be fulfilled little by little. The old me who first came to this place wouldn't even be able to recognize the current me. I didn't know at what point I had started having this kind of ambition. I had always been someone who just went with the flow. However, after being in the company of so many people who depended on me, I had started to want to become a man they could depend on. I wanted to grow, and I wanted those around me to grow as well. As a result, it was necessary to part for a time. I gave them each a final hug and a kiss, and the girls walked off into the wilderness. I marked them on my map. They might have left, but they'd never be farther than a step from me. I would build a future for all of us. Chapter 605. I'm a powerful asset, you know. You shouldn't just leave me behind. Elia appeared in my room as I was packing for my journey. Elia. I couldn't help but sigh. What do you want? Rather than look upset, Elia chuckled softly, you always play so hard to get. Far more interesting than my husband. You remind me a bit of the harem hero. You knew him. The only time I recalled him, he was mentioned briefly by Carr. She nodded. Oh yes, he fought in our army. He was a rising hero around the time I, stepped out of history. So, it was about 30 years ago he was a rising hero. Carr somehow took influence in the harem hero around 20 years ago when he was killed under mysterious circumstances. I had thought at one point it was all the church, but it turned out the church in the capital was rather harmless. Then again, that was only a part of a fractured church that had once been much larger. Presumably, that church had shattered 100 years ago before the demon lord Oberus attacked the former country of Osteria and fractured it into the Ost Republic and Oberus. What was he like? Fufu, wondering if I took any interest in him. Elia asked slyly. Even if you did, he's dead and you're mine. Furthermore, you're not even the same woman anymore. I don't hate such a master. She chuckled. As for what I thought of him, he was a bit of a party boy. He preferred flirting and leading women on. Oh? So, he was that kind of guy? One that can't commit? She raised an eyebrow. You know the type? Well, you're not wrong. The slave hero never really loved the women he controlled. The love hero was a shallow person who loved all women. The harem hero didn't have the balls to make women his. They were all lacking. Even my ex-husband, the hero king of Oberus, was a man dragged down by his own prejudices. You are different though. It is why I gave you my allegiance. When I saw you take Astria into your heart, I knew you were destined for greatness. Plus, if you didn't, I might have had no choice but to kill you. Once again, she laughed giddily. Perhaps you could have. I know that I don't have a place in your heart yet. That's something unique about you. You make the women with you want to be better. So, despite my hidden natures, I will become a woman you can be proud of. I will earn your trust one day. I just wish I knew who you are. I admitted. With Astria, that was her original form. With the giantess and the siren, they are merely monsters I tamed. You, on the other hand, are neither the queen, nor a monster. Aren't I Queen Elia? You resurrected me, after all. I'm not a spirit anymore. That's true, I responded uncertainly. I suppose it doesn't really matter. Even Kar could be resurrected. Actually, it was difficult to say whether the Kar I met in Kar's dungeon was the true Kar. He was an existence that had been corrupted and twisted by miasma for 20 years. He was a ghost that was ultimately resurrected into a human. Except, his spirit had been captured by the dungeon shortly after his death. It wasn't clear if any of Elia's spirit existed within this Elia, or if she was closer to a memory of Elia. Then again, did it matter? Elia was Elia now, and Astria was Astria. Both were women twisted by a dungeon for many years. The only ones I knew who had been spared that fate were Celeste and Terra. Although, that was a curious thought too. How had Celeste and Terra been spared the damage of the dungeon? Both had been trapped in the dungeon for equal amounts of time and had seemingly come out of it with their minds intact. It wasn't like Celeste and Terra were waging battles or fighting to the death in boss rooms or anything. I will let you continue on. Elia chuckled. I just stopped by so I wouldn't leave your mind. In time, I'll have your heart. She turned around and walked away. At that moment, an intense desire came over me, and I pulled out just a bit of fairy dust and used God's eye, examining Elia's status in front of my eye. My face turned white. Some things were better off not being known. As she disappeared out of sight, I shook my head. What the hell is a great Lich Queen, anyway? Chapter 606. I finished packing my supplies and then headed out. I met with Xiao, Raisa, Mickey, and Ruby, and then the group of us portaled to Aelrith. Ruby, in particular, seemed extremely amazed as she stepped through the white portal. The other girls had grown used to it after traveling through it so many times, but I didn't exactly use it out in public. She had to be aware I had the ability, but it was probably the best thing I was known for after being the Lord of Cham. Even after passing through, she looked at the thing in wonder until I allowed it to shut. Salicia and Carmine were thankfully waiting for us, but as expected, Carmine had packed considerably too much. Why did she even own that much stuff? I made her go and repack. While we were waiting, I went over everything with the group one more time. When it came to Deke's party, the girls would follow without questions. However, Ruby wasn't one of my girls, and Raisa was a girl who was used to going in with a plan. It was too dangerous to take on a dungeon without every person knowing their place. Well, you could say that my old party were so comfortable with each other, that our places were self-evident. Now, with the new group, especially with several women used to working alone, it'd be rockier. That included Xiao. She typically worked and fought alone. Lydia had taken her under her wing, and she was willing to follow Lydia's lead, but that didn't mean there weren't some issues there. This was a bit of a test for everyone. Well, except for Mickey. I had already told her what her job was ahead of time. She could affect people's spirit and mind. That meant that she was a mood setter. She was there to make sure the other 4 girls worked together properly. She'd keep them calm, focused, and steady. Naturally, I wouldn't tell them that. If it didn't work, I could try equipping Harem Master. Although, I didn't know what the conditions were for being in my harem. Were Carmine and Salicia considered harem members? How about even Raisa? In my mind, there were only 7 women whom I was truly close to emotionally. Xiao, Mickey, Celeste, Lydia, Tara, Astria, and Eliana. Another part of the reason I was making this journey was to get closer to Raisa, Carmine, and Salacia. Elia probably had picked up on this, which is why she had made her visit earlier as the odd girl out. I had wanted to grow closer to Raisa anyway, especially if I was going to tell her she was pregnant. The girls had begged me to spend more time with Carmine, and Salacia came with Carmine, so that's how it turned out. Salacia, is this going to be okay with you? I asked. What? Oh? About betraying and killing men and women who used to work under me? Sounds fun. You. Salacia put her hands on her hips and let out a laugh. You can't be saying you think there should be honor amongst thieves or something. We worked together for mutual gain. I used the bandits because they could help me obtain rapid wealth and power. They used me because I provided safety thanks to my great strength. That definitely is something I'm curious about. What's that? Carmine had the support of the church. She became a paladin with their support. However, how did you become a bandit king? From a girl who lost everything, even her sister, you managed to become a third tier that ruled Southwest Oberus for a time. Isn't it because I'm really amazing? Forget it, I'm sorry I asked. She let out another laugh and then spoke mysteriously. Perhaps, if our path heads that direction, you may find out about my past, but until then, you'll just have to admire me from afar. I finished packing. A muffled voice came from the stairway. I looked over to see a mass of bags and boxes strapped all around what might have been a body. I said, take what you can carry. I am carrying it all. Carmine cried. You should be able to fight, and see for that matter. Master. You let all the others carry so much stuff in their storage rings, but you haven't afforded me even one. She's got a point, you know. Mickey smirked. Whose side are you on? They all get storage rings? Deek, did I mention how manly you are? Don't you start flirting now, Ruby. This was going to be a long journey. Chapter 607. Everyone finally settled. It took a trip to the capital, where I purchased a few more storage rings. However, I only found 2 left. These items did not grow on trees and getting them for the kingdom was exceptionally difficult. Jesbane was the main country that created such magical artifacts, and there was only one enchanter in Oberus who handles basically everything. If it wasn't found in a dungeon, it was probably enchanted by this guy, although he also had 3 apprentices who did most of the smaller things, like those that I had purchased in Cham. The blue mages of the Travelers Guild were already difficult people to work with, so the times the enchanter could meet with a space mage and create rings were few and far between. Even then, working all day only got them 3 to 4. They were too expensive, and so they didn't sell well, which was the only reason I was able to get my hands on them. It was lucky to see 10 a year made. Considering I had re-equipped my 5 girls with storage rings twice now after they were destroyed, I had already used up over a year's supply of rings in Oberus, and now there was a shortage. Of course, I had also gained a few from dungeons, which were always better than the ones made by the enchanter. Not that I'd say that to his face. I'd like Celeste to level enchanter. With her wind magic, she could probably make some pretty interesting items. However, other things had always been more pressing. So, since the girls were up to 3 jobs now with the help of dungeon points, I equipped her with enchanter instead of her favored magic singer. I was eager to see what progress she made when she finally returned from her trip. So, long story short, those 2 rings had cost me 500 gold thanks to the shortage. If I didn't expect to get a lot of profit from the bandits, I definitely wouldn't have bought the 2 I did. One went to Carmine and one to Salacia. Even though Ruby gave me sad eyes, she's not even my slave and I have no responsibility to equip her. At least, I didn't have to fight with Carmine over bringing any more stuff, and she seemed quite content with it. Salicia complained it didn't have more diamonds and jewels on it. Both sisters seemed to have an inflated sense of self-worth, but where Carmine simply wanted things, Salicia wanted to be seen. She wore flashy clothing, and even now she had an assortment of diamonds and jewels on herself. It was enough to tempt any thief, so it honestly did its job. "Master, where will we be going first?" Mickey asked as we entered the traveling guild. "You won't be taking us there by portal. I already wasted a round trip with portals by going to the capital. Unfortunately, we've only walked the one road to the capital. However, there are no cities along that way now that Pembroke is wiped off the map. With the dungeon gone, no one felt the need to return to the city. I knew this because some people from Pembroke had ended up coming to Cham in hopes of a new opportunity. Somehow, despite not really being able to do anything to help them, I had become a bit of a hero. I had helped all the families resurrect everyone who had died in the bandit attack, so that was part of it. They had also heard how I fought and defeated the Clockwork Dragon. Thankfully, most of them had already fled by the time Carmine had freed it, but many had heard and seen it flying overhead, so it left quite an impression on the fleeing villagers. "Then, where will we be going?" she asked. "The last stronghold against the bandits. They have been cut off from Oberis's capital for nearly 2 months now." "Well, not entirely. They've managed to hold out because a blue mage is there and they've been able to exchange some supplies through him. It's more of a fort than a city now, with every resident who could afford to flee having since teleported away. It's right in the heart of bandit territory. It should be a good place to start." This was just the beginning. For the first time since I had been to this world, I had plans of my own. Chapter 608. The Travelers Guild in Cham had only just been set up. A building had been procured and they were still remodeling it. There was a grouchy blue mage waiting for us. I was starting to wonder if it was a mandate of the blue mages that they all be irritable and short-tempered. This was a middle-aged, pudgy man. When he saw me walk in, rather than bow as would be befitting a count, he let out a long snort. "About time you came. I drew this formation an hour ago. Since you want to be teleported to Regency, I can't guarantee that the formation will be together on their end." He turned away. "Will you stop that racket?" Someone nearby was hammering on some floorboards, but it had irritated the blue mage who had turned and yelled at him. The worker stopped hammering. He shot the blue mage a look, but otherwise remained silent. All third-tier jobs had a great deal of respect, but the blue mage in particular was responsible for an important public service. They could sway the outcome of a battle or make or break commerce. The fact that the city of Regency was still standing and had yet to be looted also had to do with a blue mage. When he turned back to the group, his eyes narrowed. "Well? I'm waiting. Are you going to get in the circle?" "Wait, the coin. I ended up paying 7 gold for the journey. I was making a trip based on the orders of the next king, protecting the country, and also, I was the lord of this city, and yet this guy still had the audacity to demand payment." I let out a long sigh and then handed him the coins, although I was wondering if I could collect taxes on the Travelers Guild. Then, I gestured for everyone to move into the circle he had drawn. I noticed that he drew it kind of small for the group we had. Usually, the standard circle drawn was enough for about 20 people unless they knew how many they were sending. It was clear that this guy was being extra stingy with supplies, because it barely fit the 7 of us. I ended up smushed against Raisa, her head pressed against my chest. She blushed shyly, and a moment later, "Will you stop hitting me with your tail? Do you want me to cut it off?" Salicia growled. Sorry." Raisa squeaked, looking anywhere but at me in embarrassment. If my arms were free, I would have patted her on the head, but right now they were shoved at my sides with 5 women all around me. "Master, doing that kind of thing here," Carmine let out a hot breath near my neck. "If you touch me like that, I'll go crazy." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not touching you whatsoever." My hands were at my sides, facing my own legs. Carmen's hot expression suddenly turned to her side. Salicia's grin started growing. Why you? Don't move. I hissed, not sure what would happen if Carmine suddenly pushed us all out of the circle. At best, I would have to pay him a second time to cast the spell. That was exactly the kind of people blue mages were. Thankfully, the magic started taking effect a moment later, and the group ended up teleporting away. When I regained my sight, there was a withered old man standing there with a cane in his hand. Finally. What took you so long? Ah, I was just about to let out another sigh at another blue mage who was surly, but then his eyes suddenly whipped to his side. Blue mage! Conjure up some food for us. It doesn't work that way. A beautiful woman said tearfully, her large breasts shaking as she cried out innocently. Has the blue mage curse finally been broken? Chapter 609. The blue mage wore a blue robe, but it had a cutout on her chest and revealed quite a bit of her large cleavage. She would definitely be an outstanding member of the church in the capital. She had long blonde hair that ran down her back in silky waves. Her eyes were a piercing purple color, and her face was round with just a hint of baby fat on her cheeks. I don't know what I was thinking, taking on a blue mage as an apprentice. The old man growled, but then his eyes fell on her chest, and it left little question as to what he was thinking. When he turned back to us, his eyes went right past me, and he checked the chest out on the girls behind me too. Carmine caught his eyes, but all the other girls seemed wanting. Salicia even puffed out her chest as his eyes wandered by. The lack of excitement in them caused her smile to turn to daggers. I shoved myself out from the middle of the girls, as I had almost been lost, and I brought out my hand. I am Count Deeksun from Cham. The future king sent me to help with the bandit situation. You are? I'm bored. He responded, not taking my hand as he turned and started walking away. Come, City, you did your job. Now, you can come satisfy me. Ah, why do you always word it that way? I'm just rubbing your feet. Hee, for now. She blushed, bowing to us in greeting. I'm sorry, my lord. He is the Grand Master Rigel, and I am his apprentice City. You can find the mayor of this city. The lord was killed on an expedition to attack the bandits last month. Ah! Not that I'm saying you'll meet the same fate. I'm sure my lord is prepared to handle unceasing waves of evil men. I mean... City. Why yes. She bowed, giving me a full view down her blouse, before she stood back up and ran after the old man, who had already left the guild and seemed surprisingly quick for someone his age. I was busy thinking about what she had said. Grand Master, would that mean he was a master magician? He'd be the first person with a fourth tier I had seen other than the fairies, Elia and the king. Even Alicia and Octius were only a third tier, although they were both really strong. I had read about it once, but it was called the third tier bottleneck. Unlocking a fourth tier job required something truly special. It was said that first tier was triggered by repetition, second tier was triggered by leveling, third tier was triggered by accomplishment, and fourth tier was triggered by mastery. Of course, that was just a saying, and didn't describe reality perfectly. You could get to a third tier of magician just by leveling, and there appeared to be no second tier when it came to dungeon diver and hero. Then again, it was probably more accurate to say that there was no first tier, since both were awarded, not gained, and were a bit beyond the basics. The same could be said for knight. There might even be a fifth tier of jobs, but the books weren't aware of it if there was one. Then again, Oberus was a small country, and only recently created, so this kind of information was limited. Plus, the concept of tiers was only something assigned to jobs for convenience, and didn't fit reality completely. As I was thinking, I realized 5 girls were glancing at me. What? I asked. No, Xiao said, crossing her arms. Not another. Mickey nodded. Another. I had no clue what they were talking about. Master must control himself, Raisa declared. I see, I nodded. In that case, let's go find this mayor. I didn't know what they were talking about, but I decided to fake it. They all acted weird sometimes. I had just been thinking about jobs, and there was nothing else on my mind. I rubbed my throat as we left the Travelers Guild. For some reason, I was suddenly thirsty for some milk. Chapter 610. We didn't have to walk far before we heard a man yelling out orders. I led the group over to him. He was a bald, skinny man with a worn look. He was wearing piecemeal armor, but it didn't look nearly as nice as the dungeon-gathered assortments I was used to wearing. I actually hadn't found any particularly good armor lately, and various fights had destroyed several of my best pieces. The one thing role-playing games never taught me was how easy it was for armor to break down and be destroyed. Well, maybe part of that was my own personal life choices, but I didn't want to get into that at the moment. As we approached him, a sudden explosion nearby caused the earth to shake and the soldiers nearby to start moving with a bit of speed. The man who appeared to be in charge bellowed out some orders. "Get some water on that!" he yelled. "Get some archers on the walls! Keep those magicians back! This is less like a bandit attack and more like a siege!" Ruby muttered. Are you soldiers sent by the capital?" The man noticed our group approaching and immediately barked that question in our direction. I tried to look confident, resting my hand on my sword. "I am Lord Deeksun, I've come." "Whatever. Get to the wall. I don't have enough men right now." He eyed the women behind me and made a face. "I guess a bunch of slave women will have to do. I asked the city for reinforcements, and they sent me some haughty noble." The somber expression on my face slipped to a frown. As I went to say something, Ruby grabbed my arm and pulled me along. The man was already barking orders at other people, not paying us any mind. That was probably for the best, as Xiao was giving him a dangerous look, and even Mickey looked like she wanted to bite him. "He's a busy man. It's best not to get into fights here. You may be a lord in Cham, but in Regency you're just a C-class adventurer who took on a quest. Technically, you're not even that, as I'm your mentor," Ruby advised. "In short, follow after me. Although you are helping out Oberys, officially, you're working under Adventurer Guild bylaws right now." I nodded, although the frown didn't leave my face. I motioned for the other girls to join me, and we followed Ruby up to the wall. As I glanced out over the field, it was definitely an eerie sight. There wasn't a row of people waiting outside, or a group of tents blocking our spot. In fact, there didn't appear to be a single bandit in view. They were all hiding in the forest beyond. If I squinted hard, I could just make out movements hidden within the shadows. What made the battlefield so frightening wasn't the bandits waiting to flood into the city, but their absence. In their place was a massive field. Not a single body remained on it. They had either been picked up or reincarnated. Their old bodies turned to dust as their new bodies were assembled with resurrection. Yet, it was still clearly a battlefield. It bore countless scars. There were arrows, abandoned equipment, carts, craters, and smoking holes. The land was pockmarked from uncountable battles. There was another boom, but this one came from another wall. People ran to that wall to try to protect it, but it was clear that the bandits' attacks could come from any side at any moment. They were just buying their time and slowly bringing the city to the breaking point. Without intervention, the city would fall to bandit hands in days, maybe weeks if they were lucky. Then, all of Southwest Oberys would be lost, and even Cham's connection to the country would be severed. This was more serious a problem than I had been led to believe. Thankfully, we were there.